Carly Fiorina is the latest GOP candidate to say that it's worth shutting down the government if that's what it'll take to cut funding to Planned Parenthood. Texas Senator Ted Cruz, he of course leading the charge, just like he led the stalemate that caused that shutdown a couple years ago. Now, both of the Republican leaders should be noted, Mitch McConnell on the Senate side and John Boehner on the House side, they are against another government shutdown, and they probably still have nightmares about the last one. Now, we all know what this stems from, the Planned Parenthood controversy. It started over undercover videos set up by a right-wing group with a strong anti-abortion agenda. Now, they show someone from the Women's Health Group, more than one in fact, talking about the fees that they get for some of the fetus's parts. It is gruesome, and some of the language I think pretty cavalier, but it is totally legal, and they're used for medical research. Here a sample.
Every provider has had patients who want to donate their tissue, and they absolutely want to accommodate them. They just want to do it in a way that is not perceived as this clinic is selling tissue, this clinic is making money off of this.
You know, I'm going to throw a number out. I would say it's probably anywhere from $30 to $100, depending on the facility and what's involved.
The $30 to $100 price, that's per specimen that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, and some of the language in some of the different locations was even more, as I said, cavalier than that, talking about the money and wanting top dollar. But, so there's a push now to pull all federal funding for the group, even though its leaders say it is not a dime of that money that's generated is spent on abortions. It's used for other women's health services, and that funding fight here could shut down Washington yet again. So if this leads to another shutdown, will the GOP be cast as villains? Before we get to the political part, let's talk about Planned Parenthood overall, because they do more than just abortions, right? And this is legal. If an elected official went to you and said, give me some counsel here, should I try and pull every dime of funding for Planned Parenthood, given those videos and given the reality of the group, what would you say?
Yes. I mean, this is so far over the top. I can't even imagine how any reasonable person cannot be completely offended and disturbed by what they're doing. I mean, the Democratic Party of today, they're fighting for abortions past 5 months of a pregnancy. That is more than halfway into a woman's pregnancy. That is almost half of a year. If you cannot decide at that point that you want to have an abortion, even as a pro-choice woman, so many people find that this is so over the top. And
well, we're talking about late-term abortions. It does come with restrictions, okay?
But this is where the party is going. They refuse to speak out against Planned Parenthood and what these videos show. They support abortions after 5 months, when even all science is showing that babies can feel pain and everything else at this point.
With
it's
restrictions,
very hard.
let's just put some,
No,
I mean, it's tough enough to have the debate on this without.
Not with restrictions.
Yes, with
in New York, they were trying to have abortion on demand through 9 months. And I think there are some in the party that are going so far overboard that it's taking a reasonable person that could be pro-choice.
All right, let's get this debate going.
I disagree very strongly with Jessica, as you might imagine. First of all, the critical question is who decides? Do you trust women and doctors to make choices about health care, or do you want to have legislators and the government reaching into the most personal and private of choices and saying it's going to be decreed thus and so? And my view is it ought to be women and doctors who are making these decisions. Planned Parenthood provides absolutely vital services to millions of women each year. Only a tiny fraction of those services relate to abortion.
Like what other services?
Well, they provide women's health care, they provide access to contraception, they provide a variety of screenings for serious illnesses, in many cases for women who would have trouble accessing medical care were it not for Planned Parenthood. And I might take some of the folks in Washington who are trying to defund Planned Parenthood seriously if they were at the same time supportive of greater access to contraception so that more people can engage in sensible family planning. But very often, those same folks are against contraception too, which would actually have the effect of reducing the number of abortions by reducing the number of unplanned pregnancies. So I think there's an enormous amount of hypocrisy going on in Washington right now. And the fact that so many Republicans are actually willing to shut down the government over this.
I'll get to the political part in a second.
Illustration of how
Watching those
videos,
videos though, Dom, just 1 second. Some of those were tough to watch in terms of language in the undercover video. Forget that it's legal or not. Given the subject matter, you know, I know they were edited. I know it doesn't represent all of them, but still they were tough.
Very tough, but if you listen to Planned Parenthood officials, they will tell you, I know Jessica will disagree with this, but they say, I believe, 3% of their funding goes towards abortions, and that's it. Piggybacking on the mayor's point that a majority of what they do goes in other areas. I mean, I just find this to be a weird dynamic because the woman at the table is arguing, well, and I really believe that we should listen to a woman and her doctor on this issue and not phony politicians that don't know what they're talking about. And so the woman at the table is arguing one way and the men on this table are arguing another way. I mean, I can understand both points of views, but I don't think that Washington should be making this type of decision and surely not shutting down the government yet again. If you're Mitch McConnell, do you think him and Boehner really want to shut down the government?
They're not going to. But do you see a problem with creating a market for fetuses?
Yes.
Okay. So I
some
think
of it goes to science. Some of it goes to science.
Okay, but you know
No, all
what?
of it goes to science.
These
No,
women
okay, that's
know.
some of it.
These
All of it
women
goes to
walking
science.
in the door don't know what's going on. And one of the most disturbing things of these videos, which was not mentioned, is that the Planned Parenthood executives were talking about changing the procedure to get more intact specimens. You're changing the health care and the service to the woman in order to profit off that, and that is a huge problem. The party is gone completely. Why?
Shut it down. And
Yes,
women,
shut
and
it
women,
down.
if they
Why
choose
does-
to have an
Why
abortion,
does,
they
if Planned Parenthood provides such good services, why do they need taxpayer funding? If they're good, then they should be able to stand on their own or get private donations. They should not have to have taxpayer funding going towards that. That's ridiculous.
Do you believe in stem cell research?
I believe in certain types of it. I don't believe in embryonic
You
stem
don't
cell
even-
research because the problem, Noam, is that what you see here is a market created for it, and you're seeing people changing the way they do things in order to get a certain outcome and profit off of it, and that is so disturbing.
I agree. It's disturbing to watch videos like that because the subject is one that we all have an instinctive discomfort with. But the reality is that embryonic stem cells and other things are used in order to cure diseases, are used in order to relieve suffering. And in every case, we're talking about embryos that would never be implanted in any case, that would ultimately be destroyed. And the question is whether you are going to provide some opportunity to enhance life, to improve lives, to cure illnesses, to extend life, or whether you're simply going to destroy tissue and not permit any benefit whatsoever. So I recognize the moral complexity, and I respect it. But I think if we're going to make sound policy decisions, we have to do our best to move past an instinctive emotional reaction and really think about how you benefit the greatest number
Well,
of
let me just
people.
get the political component in here because we already know two presidential candidates, and maybe more, but at least two are on record as saying that they are going to advocate to have their party push for legislation to defund it, and if it risks meaning closing down the government, so be it. Two Republican leaders, both the House and Senate, as I said they don't want to go down that road before. Will this be a problem for the Republican Party here if they push really hard and put legislation on the floor to do just that?
I'll say two things. Number one, it's not going to happen because the leaders already came out and said that. The Democrats would love for that to happen because it changes the conversation away from what Planned Parenthood was doing and said, look, these crazy Republicans are trying to shut down
Well, it's going to be a
government on
distraction,
this.
though, won't it?
I don't think it will be that much, but I think the reason why you're seeing some of the people push so far on that is because a lot of the mainstream media originally glossed over this completely and tried to shove it under the rug, and I think that people that do care about the issue of life were very frustrated by that. So, you know, some of the candidates they support, there's been an outcry to say, look, like, we need to do something about this. So that's where that's coming from.
Okay. When we come back, a major issue, not just nationally, but particularly in New York, has been Legionnaires. And more than just the medical issues that it's risen, and 12 deaths now, is about how the disease itself and the outbreak is exposing yet again the divide between the governor, Andrew Cuomo, and the mayor, Bill de Blasio, and how fractured that relationship really is.